So Anna, here we are.
Here we are, Ray. It took us only 8 weeks, 3 days, and 17 hours
Not too bad,
to
not
start
too bad.
this. Not too bad, honestly, no. It only took coffees or something like that.
That's right.
But I'm excited to be here.
Hi, this is Ray Namoto. I am the founding partner of a company called inaugural. I'm based in New York, but we have offices in Tokyo and Singapore. And we are a brand innovation firm working with brand and business leaders to help them navigate change.
Hi, I'm Anna Angelic. I'm brand executive. I worked at the fashion, luxury, and lifestyle brands, most recently as chief brand officer at Banana Republic and Esprit. I have a book coming out called Hitmakers, How Brands Influence Culture, and write a weekly newsletter, Sociology of Business. And as if one accent is not enough, I have my friend Ray to compliment me with some Japanese one.
That's right. Yeah. Between you, me, and our producer, Vanya, we
Oh, her accent is
maximize
perfect. Come on.
maximize the DI quota.
That's the plan. So welcome to Hitmakers podcast with Anna and Ray. You can expect conversations about brands, product strategy, creativity, and culture every 2 weeks for about half an hour of conversations, ending up with deep insights. So take notes.
Let's get to it. So the title of this podcast, you and I brainstormed quite a bit. We had a list of, 50 different names and slightly different topics. But where we landed is Hitmakers, which, by the way, is your upcoming book, just to promote that a little bit as well. And the context of the title Hitmakers is how brands influence culture. So do you want to talk about the reason why you started writing this book and why you are interested at the intersection of brands and culture and business?
I think that's a great way to start. But then I would also ask you, why did you like the title Hitmakers for this podcast?
Yeah.
Because that's the one that that resonated with both of us, and it was not in the original list.
Yeah.
So the reason I called it, by the way, I am aware that Derek Thompson has a book called Hitmakers, but this is completely different topic. There is nothing new under the sun, really. So it's how brands influence culture. The reason is that when I was at Banana Republic in Esprit, I started doing marketing strategy and creative output a little bit outside of traditional marketing strategies, which means that I started thinking, especially at Esprit, about entertainment and show business and how that is structured. I know it's very popular to talk about entertainment, but honestly, putting a 30-second spot on social is not entertainment. It's a 30-second. It's a commercial,
Yeah.
So it's not that. It was more about how to create one cultural programming platform, which means basically, how do you define cultural products, collaborations, merch, content, ads, after all, events, experiences, exhibitions that are filtered to your brand's point of view? And how do you then operationalize it in a way that is unrolled throughout the entire year and where each of the cultural outputs amplifies the other one? And what does that mean in terms of media planning, which is usually done at the beginning of the year or 6 months in advance, at least, to say, hey, we are planning Q3. And what are we going to do in terms of media? This is more like looking in which context that those different cultural outputs, like merch or collab or an exhibition or event or piece of content, really performs well, and using media to amplify it. And then execution, that rollout plan, how to make sure that everything is connected, works. And what does it mean organizationally, operationally, and talent-wise is what I became very interested in. And that's what the book is about.
Yeah. So the reason why I was interested in this topic is perhaps coming at it from a slightly different perspective, which is when I grew up, I'm originally from Japan, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I think brands occupied a larger part of the zeitgeist and larger mental space of individuals. So just to give an example, Michael Jordan, back in the 80s and 90s, used to be such a massive, iconic figure that was associated with the brand of Nike, right? And even though I was overseas, I was living in Japan, I remember having, and particularly my younger brother was a massive basketball and Michael Jordan fan. So he had multiple posters. And then when I came to the US for college, I really started to get into culture, but also I was mesmerized by the fact that brands were such strong drivers of culture. And then fast forward, this is in the 90s, right? Fast forward 20 years in 2024 now, that I wonder and question the relevance of brands in culture. At the same time, I think brands can and do occupy a certain portion of the zeitgeist, but I think it's becoming increasingly difficult for brands to remain or become culturally relevant. So that was my interest and partially because of what I do, which is to work with brand and business leaders and help them navigate change. Helping brands be and stay relevant is something that I do. Sometimes from a marketing perspective, sometimes from a technology perspective, sometimes from a product perspective, from different perspectives. But brands and organizations staying relevant and potentially influential in culture is an ongoing interest of mine, especially because there are so many other forces in culture that are making it often difficult for brands to be relevant in that space.
Yes, and I don't necessarily agree that brands are not as relevant in culture as they were. Is the problem is that like they rely on mass media, and when mass media stop being as a model of influencing culture, stop being relevant, then that sort of way of communication is not relevant.
Yeah,
brands are still relevant. However, we're seeing like niche brands, micro brands, super targeted ones, smaller. So the influence scale is not mass anymore. But some brands are very, very relevant in a lot of different communities. Some brands we never heard of.
Yeah.
That's one way of saying it. The second is I can also say, yeah, maybe they're not as relevant anymore. Maybe it's with online aggregators, maybe products are where things are at. And that's what we talk about like as product-led branding, when a product itself delivers the aesthetics, the value, the narrative, it doesn't need any sort of wrapping. And basically that is what started Nike at the end of the day, which is the waffle shoe that allowed Nike to become a brand to make all those sorts of different things. And you have the same with Levi's 501s. The innovation was those little rivulets or whatever is named that were put on pockets to enforce them. And product innovation led to a brand. And the brand was created through a lot of people wearing that product and participating in different cultural contexts. So you basically have their stories that make the brand. Whereas what you're saying in the 80s and 90s, which is the golden age of Pepsi commercials, Coca-Cola commercials, Nike commercials, it's all about creating happiness for Coca-Cola or music for Pepsi. It's like creating some sort of an idea and then shoving products under that idea and thinking that emotional association is. That's what the brand used to be. But I wonder if a brand can be like original brands are literally their marks on cows or other property. To signify belonging to someone, to mark them together as a group of things. So it was literally original brands were literally guarantees of quality. I trust Ray. So when he puts a star, I know that's Ray approved. Right?
Yeah, my brand.
That's your branding.
Yes.
How many of those shirts do you have? Or is that the old one?
I have multiple. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that, how many I have. But so just to go deeper in today's topic, which you and I discussed before recording this, that we'll talk about product-led branding. Would you say that every brand starts with a product?
No, it doesn't need to start with the product. I mean, like, look at those, like, look, Kylie Cosmetics. Look at, like, yes, you need to have a hero product, but that product doesn't need to be, like, markedly better than anything else. Like, when you look, like, or Hailey Bieber wrote, she was like, her best and most popular innovation is to have iPhone case for a lip balm.
Oh.
But that's not even a beauty product. That's a tech accessory. So I would say yes, you can have a brand, and you can just like, and even like when you think about Glossier, for example, where really Emily Weiss delivered was the content and community around beauty cosmetics products. But then when she started creating products, they were not aside of a boy brow. They were nothing to write home about.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about Estee Lauders of the world, or like if you stay with the beauty industry, they created a product that a lot of people used. And that allows it, that's what we said about Nike, about Levi's, allows them to diversify in different categories. Today it's Agostinus Bader. It's that rich cream that they have that is like people are swearing by. And then they introduce others. What do you think?
I think that in the past, say 10 years, even 20 years ago, it was perhaps slightly easier to build a brand that wasn't dependent on a product or products. Mm-hmm. But I think in today's market, that having a product is more critical than it used to be. And in some cases, depending on different categories of business that we're talking about, products becomes the lead for the brand to exist and establish, right? So that's number one. Number two, I think like the examples that you mentioned, Nike with the waffle shoe or Levi's with the 501s and so forth. Those are the early examples of those brands and how they became popular before they became famous and before they became loved as a brand. So to go back to my earlier point about Nike and Michael Jordan, way before that, there were the waffle shoes and Nike Air Max that became sort of iconic representation of a brand. I would say in the case of Nike, before Michael Jordan, they had a guy named Steve Prefontaine who was a runner. And he was the personification of the spirit of the brand, but the shoe that he wore and the other runners at the early on. But I think nowadays, I think products do lead brands. We can also dig deeper into, other than a product or products, how a brand is represented can influence the brand's position within culture, right? So for instance, I'm going to use a completely different example just as a way of discussion. So something like OpenAI and ChatGPT, right? OpenAI existed as a company and quote unquote as a brand several years before ChatGPT. And the ChatGPT capability existed before November of 2022. November 2022 is when it became a phenomenon because, quote unquote, the product, the chat interface, and the fact that you can type into it and then real time, it answers your question and you see, it's as if you're discussing with the computer. That was the product. And that became a sensation. And then people started to be aware of OpenAI as a quote unquote as a brand. And then there's Sam Altman, who's the cheerleader, the flag bearer of the brand, who's leading the charge in the generative AI space. And there are other products like Claude from Anthropic, which is basically A, started by the same people who are at OpenAI, and B, it has most of the capabilities of ChatGPT, and the capabilities aren't drastically different from ChatGPT. but the mental space that OpenAI and ChatGPT takes up in the cultural zeitgeist is way much bigger, way, way, way more dominant than, say, Claude and any other very similar quote unquote products.
But isn't it too soon to tell? Because it's been like, what, 2 years?
2 years.
ChatGPT was just the first, you know? So I would give it a minute before to see if Claude or Proximity are going to gain. But I see what you're saying. It's kind of brand made tangible or technology made tangible in a customer-facing manner. In a way that customers can easily relate to, understand, use, and so on. So I understand that. But I also think that you can have absolutely brands. When I say without products, I don't mean you need to have something physical or you need to have like experience or you need to have a service. You need to have something that you're offering to some consumer proposition. But look at luxury. Luxury brands, especially fashion luxury brands, they're all marketing, they're all branding. It's not really craftsmanship if you're making everything in China. Hermes is craftsmanship because they have like artisanal workshops and they're making it locally. And they're smaller ones, Brunello, Cucinelli, for example. But majority of those brands, they don't have actually the product excellence that may have made the Louis Vuitton truck that was the thing back in the day because it was the first one that was made. Again, it was a product innovation that created the brand. With Chanel as well. It was literally her artistic vision that created that changed how women dressed and that created the brand.
Right.
But when you look like go 30 years back or 40 years back, those are tiny little money losing endeavors. Because they were actually produced very laboriously and with craftsmanship in mind, and how many you can create if humans are creating it, not gigantic factories and so on.
Yeah. So on that note, luxury, I think, is an interesting territory to talk about. And I want you to talk specifically about like the aspects of product-led branding that you write. But before getting into the specifics, you mentioned Hermes. Do you think that, how much of that, the power and the presence of a brand like Hermes comes from the real quality, real craftsmanship of the product that they, let's say, say the Birkin bag, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, of course, there's the craftsmanship and the handmade quality that goes into the product versus whatever other brand that may not put as much resource or as much effort into creating a product, but tries to charge. Where is that discrepancy?
Well, discrepancy, I think there is, first of all, if you don't have a brand, then you have artisans. And artisans, when you go through Italy, they're like artisans who are making leather goods without having a brand. The thing is, like, one is having luxury brands and the other is having artisanal products. And artisanal products and luxury products can be the same thing. If you use the same leather, if you do use the same craftsmen or so on, but you don't have a brand, you don't have cultural association, then you sell it as an artisanal product. You don't sell it as a luxury product. And the price is completely different. Mm-hmm. What is the price is that soft power, the cultural relevance, cultural resonance, the story how Hermes Birkin was created, and now it's on exhibition. The first Birkin bag that someone owns is going to be on exhibition that was created, and because Jane Birkin was the icon, the it girl of the 60s, 70s, so on. So you see, it's all those stories. Objects don't have emotional value unless they're touched literally by humans. Some personalities, some context. Like you're say bidding for a pair of Nike Air Jordans. When you're buying one that was part of Virgil Abloh's collection, it's going to be completely different value and price than the one that was owned by a random hypebeast.
Okay, so let me break down these 5 elements of product-led branding that you talk about. And I want to kind of stress test this. No pressure. No pressure. But stress
You're going to be stress testing it too.
Yeah. Between products that we just talked about, say like an Hermes bag or vintage Levi's jacket, right? But also, I want to understand these elements more specifically in relation to, say, products that I think have cultural influence, but may not have the heritage or history that you talked about. Okay. So just to lay this out, the 5 elements or 5 aspects of product-led branding, according to the writing that you've done. Number 1, value. Number 2, where. Number 3, aesthetics. 4, narrative. And 5, fandom. Yeah. So if we take, let's say, Birkin or Levi's jacket, can you quickly talk about what you mean by value, where, aesthetics, narrative, and fandom?
Absolutely. And then I want you to come up with a different example.
Yeah.
And because, like, for example, value of a Levi jacket, it lasts so long. It's really well made because of the product innovation that was at the core of Levi's. So when you buy something on eBay, a jacket, you're buying it because it's still together. It didn't fall apart after 10 wears. So that's the actually inherent product value, the quality, product quality. And that is something that luxury brands, you have to have that quality. The second one, when you have, what is the second one?
Where? So value where?
And I
So
think we talked about that. Aesthetics is that it's recognizable. So Levi's have a specific way that you recognize Levi's jacket aesthetically versus Wrangler jacket or Diesel jacket and so on. So basically the product aesthetic is designed into a product. Some brands have, like, for example, Birkin has this little clasp, or Nike has its own, like, waffle, the sole, or Gucci has double G, and like stuff that brand codes that are part of the, or maybe Burberry has check, or so it's basically having a signature aesthetic. The fourth one is narrative, which means what are the stories. So basically that would be all the historical advertising that made Levi's what it is. Not just those subcultures of people who bought it and wear it, but you know how iconic they were? Like, you still remember the one, that ad in laundromat, which was now brought back with Beyonce starring in it. But even print ads of Levi's were unbelievably memorable. So that was at a time where advertising was influencing culture to such a degree, mass media, that it really got embedded in people's minds as part of a cultural context for a product. So that's what I'm saying about what is the story around this, what context was created, cultural context. And finally, fandom. There are people who have collections of 1950s, 60s, 70s. So they know among themselves who are the dealers, who are the buyers, who are the sellers, they know exactly to tell you what is the value of a certain pair versus another one. So that is important to have there. And I think that is how people consume today. Although the brands may have not caught up yet, that's what we are seeing on TikTok. That's what we are seeing in fan communities among Gen Z right now.
Yeah. One point that you made was product-led branding is selling the wear, right? The wear is the wear as in W-E-A-R, something that you wear. The wear is the brand. What do you mean by the wear?
It's who was this touched by. Jane Birkin was the one who had the prototype. She wore a Birkin bag and she landed her cultural clout and her significant association, emotional charge to that specific product. So when you have Doc Martens or Levi's or Birkenstocks were so uncool for like 100 years. They were worn in the 80s by German tourists and by hippies, Then all of a sudden, through a whims of fashion, or by right people wearing them, but also by the zeitgeist being right, for them to sort of explode, because the aesthetics of the culture, the comfort, how people think about work versus leisure, how do they go about the moment, like the same thing with sneakers, the moment, like you had yuppies, you have like metrosexuals in the 90s, and then all of a sudden, you can go to work wearing a hoodie, And that changed because the culture over pop culture really changed. So change of pop culture really allowed Birkenstocks to become cool, to collaborate with Dior and whatnot, you know? So I think it's kind of important to look, but when I say about wear, it's not just who wears them. That's like the least important thing.
Okay.
It's like, what are the wear stories that are embedded in culture and subcultures? Doc Martens were connected with punks. Levi's are connected with farmers first, but then in the 70s, maybe with hippies. Then, you know, you need to kind of have certain culture that gives product context. And that is that wear. I'm not talking about me literally wearing a pair of 501s, although that may become relevant if I want to sell them on a secondary market. And they're like artfully broken in. Like 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I bought an APC vintage pair of jeans. They cleaned them by putting them in the fridge, and they're worn in such a perfect way that I paid, I don't know how much more than I would have paid for a brand new pair. When you go online and you see signs of wear become those status symbols, go online, go to eBay, you'll see Levi's stuff, jackets, 501, so on, for $100,000.
Right. Yeah.
So people are buying the wear. They're not buying that pair of jeans.
Do you mean when you say wear, is it synonymous with story?
Well, it's synonymous with history.
History.
And heritage, because by wear, it's been touched by a specific context. It existed in a specific culture. If you buy a pair of Levi's from the 60s, what are you really buying? What are you buying, Ray?
Well, yeah, you're buying the history, to your point.
And the cultural context and that emotional association, you're literally buying the heritage. You're buying the wear.
Yeah, I have two products that I want to stress test. One is in the fashion retail sector, and the other one is the technology sector. So the first
Let's do technology. We already talked about fashion.
Okay.
Do technology.
Yeah, technology. The product that I was thinking of was either iPhone or AirPods. Okay. Right? These, and then let me. So you know what? Let's talk about the AirPods, because that's much more specific, and it's physically a very tiny product, but it's an enormous business, and every audio equipment maker that I've dealt with, either directly or that I know, they would love to have the kind of distribution reach and the dominance that AirPods as a product has. And it's not even Apple's main line of business. It's like a hobby, you know, like the main line of business is the iPhone, the laptop and other things. And, you know, this is just an accessory that they make, but the accessory is an enormous business that anybody would dream to have. What I want to find out, right, in this conversation, and probably, I mean, part of the purpose of this podcast is how does a brand deliberately, on purpose, strategically create a hit, a cultural hit, not an accident, but like...
Well, they can't. You see, like they can't. What you can do is you can create a lot of different hits in a hope that one of them is going to become... Like Apple didn't lead with AirPods. They first built iTunes, then all of a sudden they were in the music business, then they reinvented like unbundling from albums to songs, and then they closed the loop. You know what I mean? But if they were like, let's create AirPods, I don't think that conversation ever happened.
Interesting.
Maybe it did.
Yeah. So just to go down this list, value, wear, aesthetics, narrative, and fandom. Value, I do think that it has a superior functional feature, like the integration with other Apple products. But to your point...
You mean that it always connects with what is not supposed to connect to?
But like, you know, as opposed to non-Apple products, like AirPods do a much better job of connecting to, you know, your iPhone or your laptop and what have you. Yeah. I also, I mean, this is kind of a tiny detail, having tried other earphones, that AirPods actually do stay on in your ears more so than other products that I've tried. So I think there's some superiority. I don't necessarily think like the sound quality is that great, but it's good enough that I think people tolerate. Yeah. this topic of where or the context or the story,
I don't think
think
that applies to tech products because tech products have designed obsolescence into them. They always force you to buy, like, look, every 2 years I have to buy a new Mac because the battery dies. I think they want you to upgrade. And also it's kind of disgusting if you buy someone else's AirPods. You know what I mean? So I think the where doesn't apply actually to tech products. Like, look, my phone has wear. Look, it's cracked.
Right. Yeah.
But you know what? The only thing it does for me, I won't be able to swap it. I have to give it to my nephews because I'm not gonna get any good price. Like, look, it's all cracked. You know what I mean? So it's kind of the opposite. But I think that's for tech products.
I was thinking like things like cars. I guess you could sell vintage cars, but you
definitely.
would have to,
But that's vintage Toyota versus vintage Porsche or Ferrari.
Yeah. Right,
you know what I mean? It's not the same. However, I'm going to say one thing. If this phone was owned by, I don't know, Noel Gallagher or something, then it would be by that, because it was touched by then it would be a collectible, then it would have
It becomes a special thing.
Sort of value. So not anywhere. Like it does, technology products can, if they were owned or they were used like, I don't know, like to deliver some crazy news or for the last phone call before someone, XYZ, first call from the moon, the phone that like the first person on the moon called, commercial person.
Yeah. The next point, aesthetic. I would push on this a bit. Aesthetics in terms of how good looking it is, how recognizable it is. Like, in the Apple AirPods case, it's the white pod case, and this one, it's very recognizable, and it was rare, especially when it first came out. Even before AirPods, when it was the wired earphones, the iconic nature of it, I think, was useful. I also do think in the case of more utility products, as opposed to, I think what you call like identity product versus functionality product. Like AirPods are largely maybe 60, 70% is a functionality utility product. And then maybe 30% is an identity product. Whereas like a jacket is perhaps 70%, 60%, 70% an identity product versus a utility or a functionality product. So I think the balance, like knowing the balance between what's for the buyer's or the user's identity versus functionality, I think it plays into the facts. So for instance, the Nike example that we brought up, but a different Nike example, Nike Air Max, right? So the shoes with the air bag in the sole, the first version of Nike Air wasn't the airbag wasn't visible. It was inside the outsole. So the airbag was invisible. So they had to do a lot of explanation in advertising to say that there's an airbag that was invented at NASA, and that's why it gives cushioning, right? And they actually tried to sell Nike Air for 7 years without that much success. But it was when the designer, Tinker Hatfield, decided to make a hole in the outsole so that you can see the airbag. And then the innovation became visible, right? So I think the point about aesthetics, one dimension that I would add is, in addition to the identity of the individual that it's trying to represent, I think in a tech product or products that have utility or functionality as a big part of its feature, making innovation visible and easily understandable, I think as part of this aesthetic is a really, really key part.
It is. That's what your ChatGPT example was before.
Very, very so.
It was
very much so.
very intuitive to use. It looked like a search box, and it was, like
I was the side conversation, but I was talking to a startup founder maybe about a year or so ago, and he started an AI company maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and by the way, this person shall remain nameless, but he was claiming that he already had ChatGPT as a product in his company, at his company. But he says the main difference is, like when you use ChatGPT, like you see it typing out its answers real time. That text is animating in front of your eyes. This person that I was talking to says that was the key differentiator that made the innovation visible or part of the aesthetic of the product. And it wasn't like just displaying the answer all at once, but it was typing out. So I think the additional layer that I would put into this topic of aesthetics is innovation made visible and understandable.
Well, does it have to be innovation, or it can be like any mechanism that can? Because you know what? Also, I would also say the reason why ChatGPT does little when it's typing, it's working, because that's how humans text each other. Yeah. You can see 3 dots, so it's kind of the context was already very familiar.
Yeah. The narrative part of this 5-part product-led branding, coming back to the iPod, the AirPods.
I'm going to jump in really quickly, because you remember the advertising of the original version, they were not AirPods. It was iconic advertising, because it was like people were just silhouettes. Yeah. And you could see just the product. And I think back then, they were not trying to create funny, spots with people dancing. It was literally just silhouette and this iconic thing. And it's you wear this one thing and you're already defined as cool, as... we're talking back when Apple was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And important, almost luxury good in culture.
Yeah. So I think in the case of a brand like Apple, which every marketer envies, does benefit from having the history and the previous narrative, leading up to it. It's not a new brand. It's existed in
and it has a crazy innovator story and a comeback story. It has everything that culture responds to. Comeback story, check. Asshole innovator, check. First computer, crazy innovation, 10 steps ahead of everyone else. You know what I mean? Yeah. You just have so many of those. And even those iconic ads from the 80s.
Yeah. But why do you think that, so getting to the last point, the fandom aspect, Steve Jobs has been gone for more than 10 years, and
what do you think of people who still quote Steve Jobs?
It's getting tired.
Getting tired. Brian and I were texting and we were like, we're those psychos.
Apple is a case study that keeps coming up in client meetings.
I know. Yeah. Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow. All I have to say is wow. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but you know what? I think the next person to be quoted would be Sam Altman, most likely.
Really? Elon Musk,
I think so.
Maybe.
I think Elon Musk is politically too controversial, has become controversial.
Well, Steve Jobs was not political, but he was controversial.
He was controversial, but he wasn't, I don't think he was as politically motivated.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It was a simpler time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so going back to, but there was a movie, there was the book, Walter Isaacson, you know what I mean? There was a myth making around this brand that is going to carry it over. It's the most valuable brand in the world still.
Yeah.
Number one on Interbrand, So but that's all that myth making that happened in the past, 50 years, 40 years.
Yeah. All right. So to wrap up our conversation, we are going to share each a key takeaway from this conversation. So Anna, I know this is a topic that you've been deeply engaged and have been studying, but if you wanted to share one thing for the audience to take away, what would it be?
So it'd be that cultural influence can be reverse engineered, and that product-led branding can also be reverse engineered. Even if you're starting a brand now, and a lot of new brands are actually doing this successfully, it's possible to add a narrative, create fandom, have a signature aesthetics, have a wear story, have a product value. You don't need to wait 100 years for all of that to be accumulated. It can be Ralph invented his story, for example. A lot of new brands, even Rod, again, Hailey Bieber's brand, she's super aesthetically consistent. She has really fun tone of voice. She has lines, like masses of fans, and it's so everything is about like this vague idea of having like peach glazed skin. So she has a pretty good idea in where she plays in terms of aesthetic landscape and brand tone. So she's probably reverse engineering most of those, not necessarily product value, but hey, that tech accessory is super valuable. What about you, Ray?
My summary would be for a brand to have any cultural significance and relevance with the audience, I think it comes down to two things. One is the product. The other is the point of view that the brand has, the people who started the brand, the people who manage the brand, and how that point of view is represented in the product. So I think it comes down to product plus point of view, because without the point of view, it just becomes a,
Commodity.
Commodity or just an artisanal product versus a luxury product. So product and point of view.
Cool. So what I'm obsessed with, I need to show you guys. It's like
Okay.
former CEO of Abercrombie Fitch is accused of sex trafficking. I mean, talk about the brand challenge.
Oh, I did not expect that. So that's your
Well,
your
it's
hit
just
list
from
this week.
today. Like you need to ask me every day what's occupying my attention.
Wow, because I mean, Abercrombie & Fitch is a brand that is making a bit of a comeback lately, isn't it?
They have amazing product. They have amazing merchandising. So let's talk about that in the next episode. Let's focus on sex trafficking now.
Sounds good. So did it just come out today? Oh, wow. I wonder by the time this episode comes out where that story might be and how that might influence the
Stay
brand
tuned,
and
guys.
culture.
Anna and Ray investigate.
That's right. That's right. Okay. My hit list this week is I randomly came across this product. I'm not a target audience, but it really caught my attention. It's a company called Terra, Terrae. It's a new company that's only been around for about 4 years, since 2020 or 2021. And they make activewear, workout wear. But the thing that I was captivated by was this gym bag that came out of Asia.
I designed this yoga bag and it was sold out in 1 hour. The all-day gym bag has many pockets, high quality zips, it's durable, capable, can pack many thingsable, and most importantly, machine washable. To me, this is more than just a gym bag.
It's a yoga bag that one of the founders of this company designed, and it apparently sold out in like 36, 48 hours.
Why?
Yeah.
That bag, that what I just saw, that sold in 36 hours.
Yeah, like in a day or two. I don't know how many they made. It's probably a small batch and small run. But I'm curious. So this is sort of in contrast to the entire conversation that we had, in that this company doesn't have any history yet. It's been around only for 3 or 4 years, right? It's not necessarily associated with anybody super famous. It doesn't have the cultural impact, but it managed to, and then, granted that it's a pretty small brand and small batch, so selling out may not be as difficult as, say, other mass brands. But I'm kind of curious because this was such a product-led storytelling. And I'm curious if a company like this, where they might be in a year, 2 years, 3 years, and if they manage to build that myth of a brand.
They'll have to. They need to build a brand because otherwise a competitor is going to show up, build a cheaper version or maybe sturdier version or something like that. That's the thing. Like everyone would be just like, who wants to deal with brands? Who wants to hire marketing departments? They're a pain in the butt,
Yeah.
Like, they would just all be making products if there was not such an easy thing to imitate. And since they're like posted themselves on Instagram, they have initial fan group, but now they need to build a myth with that.
Yeah.
They need to do a collaboration, they need to do a merge, they need to do a pop-up experience and the marketing 101. Come on, Ray, you can do better than this.
What? All right, challenge accepted.
I knew you would take it.
Yeah. Anna, this is coming out on Halloween.
Yes.
Are you dressing up or you're not a dresser?
I'm not. Like, what about you? What about you?
I'm not a dresser, but I have kids, and my youngest one, who's 4, is dressing up as a race car driver. So
Oh my
that's
God, I
that's
love
my
it so
that's my Halloween
much.
satisfaction.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Do you know like F1 has such a cool stuff?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I'm so jealous. You gave me an idea. It's exciting because this episode drops on Halloween, and I hope that sets the tone for all the episodes to come. So thank you for listening, and see everyone again in mid-November.
2 weeks. All right. Bye.